Welcome everybody. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm the co-founder and convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. We're really excited to welcome you all today. In Australia, it's just past 9 a.m. in the morning here in beautiful Brisbane. I know there are folks joining us from across the Pacific in other parts of the world. So if you're in the northern parts of the US or Canada, I suspect it's late afternoon or evening. So in the famous words of the Truman Show, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I am going to screen and we will kick off hopefully any minute now. So again, welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, thanks so much for making the time to join our wonderful webinar. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm with the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. I'm also one of the founding members of the wonderful ELGA, the Ecological Law and Governance Association, and many members of ELGA and AELA are on our call today. Our program for, I'll keep saying this morning, I hope that doesn't throw our North American friends too much, but our program for today is, I'm going to give some brief introductory remarks and then a short talk about earth jurisprudence, ecological law, and the role of the sacred. And then I'll be really happy to hand it over to Mary Graham and Mary Tinney to give their talks. Because we do have two Marys, and I've joked a few times that we sound like a 60s folk band, Mary, Mary and Michelle. I will maintain Mary Graham and Mary Tinney. I'll keep saying surnames. So I'm not being formal. I'm just trying to remove confusion. So that's our program. A couple of housekeeping things before we kick off properly. Hang on. So the webinar is scheduled for 9 a.m. to about 10:30. If you have to jump off earlier, our speakers will probably be finished well and truly by 10 past 10. We're going to have a bit of time after Mary's talk to have a few questions for Mary Graham. And then after Mary Tinney, we'll have questions for her and then open it up for any kind of conversation we would have. Obviously, you're welcome to come and go as you please. Please do stay on mute. As I explained, this isn't a meeting format, not a webinar format, so that can be challenging sometimes. The only other thing to mention is if you are new to Zoom, I'm sure you're not. Most people these days, post-COVID, are experts on Zoom. But if you are new to Zoom, two key things. The main menu buttons for Zoom are along the bottom of your screen. If at any time when we're sharing screen, you feel like we have taken over your computer, just press escape and the whole screen should go smaller and you can maintain control of your life. So that's great. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do, for those who don't know, this is a map of what is today called Aboriginal Australia. Perhaps for our friends and colleagues in other places, this is an imperfect map, but a wonderful reminder of the phenomenal governance system and the amazing First Nations peoples that existed and still exist in this beautiful continent of Australia. But this is, roughly speaking, the map of Australia pre-1788, when the British came over and did their thing. And the reason I show this map, for folks who are not from Australia, you might not be familiar with the fact that one of the small ways we try to acknowledge the impacts of colonisation is we acknowledge country. So I'm going to do that now. And if you're an Aussie, you might want to have a think about whose country you're on. But today I am meeting with you from Brisbane, which is just down here. And I think I've circled that right. I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations peoples, the Yagara and Turrbal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting today. And I'm sure that you're all meeting on other country and other places today. So I just want to acknowledge elders, past and present, the ancient wisdom, the current leaders and the emerging leaders with whom I work and take great joy in working together to think about our future here on this continent. And I know that Mary and Mary will do their own acknowledgement when they are speaking. So in addition to housekeeping and facilitating, I think, what is now 100 people, I'm going to give you a short talk about earth jurisprudence. So thank you for your patience. we were a little bit joyfully overwhelmed by the number of people interested in this meeting. So do bear with me if occasionally I have to flick between checking messages and doing other things. But the topic for today is the role of the sacred in nurturing law, governance, and earth-centered thinking. And it's a wonderful topic really because it is encouraging us to think very much outside our traditional space for law-structured approaches. And that little image there I'm going to come back to, that is an Australian blue-banded bee. As Australia has an amazing realm of plants and animals that are very different to other places in the world, including our bees. We have nearly 2,000 species of local bees for Australia. And I'm going to come back to the blue-banded bee as one of my stories about the sacred. But first, I'd like to, just for anyone who's on this call who's not heard of ELGA, the Ecological Law and Governance Association, jump in and out of the website, but just for now, I just wanted to share with you, ELGA has been up and running for several years now. It seeks to provide a forum and a platform for diverse groups to work together, to amplify their voices, and to transform our current human-centered legal system towards an earth-centered legal system. And I'd like to acknowledge Jeff Garver, who's on this call. And if Katie is on, I'm sorry, I can't see you while I'm speaking, but they're two of my wonderful colleagues inside ELGA, and working with them has been wonderful and really expanded the work that I do here in AELA. I might at the end just show you some of the websites. I think it's nice if you're new to these spaces to become familiar with what's on offer in all these different groups and the things that they share. And I will talk about the Oslo Manifesto in the second part later when I come back to reflect on the role of the sacred and the call of the Oslo Manifesto, which really is part of the mission of ELGA. So the other thing I wanted to do is introduce my organisation, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, because our work directly speaks to the role of the human spirit, emotion, love, and the sacred in building an earth-centered society. We were formed in 2012 by a group of really quite amazing environmental and other lawyers. And since that time, we've grown into a network of people across all kinds of modern disciplines, including economics, education, ethics, politics, and a whole range of science and First Nations knowledge systems experts as well. Our mission is to increase the understanding and practical implementation of earth-centered governance. And I'll come back later if I have time to talk to you about this little diagram. This represents the core themes of our work. And for a group who have been created by lawyers, but built around Thomas Berry's work, which I will mention in a moment, changing culture and connecting to matters of the heart and matters to the spirit have always been a foundational point for AELA's work. Oops. So just a very brief introduction to earth jurisprudence for anybody who may not have heard or who, like me, loves it and just likes to be reminded. Earth jurisprudence or earth laws or earth-centered governance is really a call for us to think about the human-centered systems that a lot of modern industrial societies are structured around, to rethink the image on the left and to try to imagine what our governance system might look like if we built it out from an understanding of the image on the right. This idea that human beings really are no more important than any other living organism on the planet. We have just reached a certain status due to what I often call, we tripped over consciousness and then developed high technology, and now we've created quite the complex societies that are having a large impact. But for folks like me, I normally, sorry, I forgot, I normally acknowledge I am a descendant of the settler peoples who came to Australia, the English and the Irish. And for folks like me and my culture, the image on the left is still predominantly the way our mainstream culture sees the world. Everything is about human beings, and most other things are either human property or not really worth thinking about, don't really factor it in. And that has created, in very simplistic terms, many of the root problems of what we're facing today. This idea that we have eaten up the world through extractivism and a non-regenerative culture. And we're left with the point where we have these problems with our climate system and many other impacts on biodiversity, land use, and others. So I have really dedicated most of my life to working on how do we care for the environment and see ourselves differently. And many of the people on this call, I'm sure, are the same. Just a brief reminder, before we talk about the sacred, I think it's, and certainly for the work we do within AELA, it's actually really important to be reminded that anthropocentrism is much more than just thinking everything is about human beings today. As Thomas Berry says, the deepest cause of the present devastation is found in a mode of consciousness that has established a radical discontinuity between the human and other modes of being. And anthropocentrism is much more than just human beings putting themselves first. It's really a deeply entrenched worldview that human beings are the central fact of the universe. We are the final aim and end, and the earth exists primarily to satisfy human needs and desires. And when I teach earth jurisprudence, I do a number of thinking exercises, and even some of my most earth-centered students are shocked by the way that we still think about human beings first, and that we often don't see in real practical terms that the living world around us are our relatives, are our neighbours, they are part of our community. And really that's the essence of what we do within AELA and in other places, is challenge anthropocentrism and invite us to think creatively about what governance systems would look like if we thought differently. Thomas Berry is one of a lovely influence and inspiration to the work that AELA has done. For those who don't know him, if you Google him, you'll find wonderful quotes and an array of really lovely books. He was sort of a deep ecologist. He called himself a geologian, but I'll just briefly mention two books that inspired some of the work of AELA, and particularly the universe story, I think is a direct connection to really thinking about what is the sacred. In the universe story that he wrote with Brian Swim, they basically explored our modern understandings of the world. And I love it because they urge us to reconsider human beings' place, not only on this planet, but in the broader long history of the universe, which often in our busy lives, even people involved in progressive social change, they don't often think about the long story, the really deep time and the deep history. So the universe story invites us to see the living world as a guide and inspiration for everything that humans do. And then the other book, which I won't talk about too much because I really want to hand over to Mary Graham, but The Great Work, Our Way into the Future, is really a direct inspiration for the structure that AELA took on in the work that we do. In this book, Thomas Berry turns his wonderful, beautiful writing style and wonderful big brain towards the ideas around what's governing human societies. And in it, he critiques the underpinning structures of industrialized society. And he looks at these what he calls four fundamental establishments that control human affairs: law and government, economics, universities and education, and religion. And he argues that because of our anthropocentric origins and the impacts of every decision we make being fundamentally anthropocentric, and then inside this kind of pro-growth mentality that has arced out from our colonial expansion, my culture, into the 20th century and 21st, we've got some serious problems that we need to address. So from my point of view, at least, as someone who's worked for a very long time caring about the systems we live within and hoping that we can move them, earth laws and earth jurisprudence and Thomas Berry's work is really important because it can help us stop thinking about the day-to-day long enough to really question the underpinning ideology and value system that has driven us to where we are today. I like this quote from Cormac Cullinan, I'll wrap up in a minute, because he reminds us, even though we're focused on ecological law and governance, the legal or structural reform within a society, this quote reminds us that it's much more than just changing a law here or there. Fundamentally changing our governance systems will require more than reforming existing laws or making new ones. We need to take a long, hard look, not only at our legal systems, but the legal philosophies that underlie them. And only by creating a vision of an earth-centered system will we be able to transform our systems. So what then is the role of the sacred in all of this? I did what any good, I was going to say legal beagle does. I just dug up a few definitions. The role of the sacred, when you see definitions of the sacred, is a very strong focus on religion. As someone who is cheerfully agnostic, the definition or the words that I relate to the most is highly valued and important, unassailable. If we think about our relationship with the living world as highly valued and important, I think the big question then is, what do we do about it? If we love the living world, and as Thomas Berry says, most of our structures are geared towards using up the living world as if it's property, then what role does the sacred have in helping us transform and shift? And this is where I come back to the blue-banded bee. When I'm in my garden and I see these little bees buzzing around, it is literally like seeing a magical fairy. And one day I was sitting in the garden weeding, and one of these little bees, what you may not know is they burrow. One of these little bees buzzed in front of me and then ducked down near my hand. I lifted up a blade of grass, and she, because it's the females who burrow, she disappeared into a little hole under the grass. And in that moment, I actually burst into tears because I was so overwhelmed with just the joy of seeing this incredible little creature and be honored to have such a little dude living in my yard. And although we have built AELA for more than 8 or 9 years, it's in those moments when I look at that little bee and I realize that nothing should harm these creatures, and we certainly should support their ongoing life. That to me is where I see the sacred. From the moment I could stand up and I loved plants and animals, my question was, why do we have systems that hurt them so much? And can't we do things differently? And that's really all I wanted to say. That's a beautiful mosaic someone else made, not me. But to me, that is a reflection of the sacred, loving something so much that you spend time carefully making a little image of them, and hopefully, like me, spending your entire life in your garden being quite obsessed with planting things that bring them into life and bring them into your garden. So by way of introduction, Earth jurisprudence is a way of saying the living world is sacred. There is nothing more important as living beings than our community of life. And what I love as someone who was trained in the Western tradition of law is that Earth jurisprudence asks us to rethink governance and to be deeply creative and to actually challenge the systems we have and make something better. And it's with appreciation and love that we can actually be inspired to do the long haul work to make those changes and to contribute to those changes. Because without love, I'm not sure where the motivation comes from. So that's all I wanted to say. And I'm sorry, I think I took longer than I ever planned to. The dangers of having someone chair and speak. But look, I'm really delighted to introduce my 2 speakers, my co-speakers. I'm just going to try to, Mary Graham. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, Mary, I was trying to
yes.
sound so formal. I would love to introduce to you all now Mary Graham. For many of us in Australia, Mary is really, we look upon her as a national treasure because she is a philosopher at the University of Queensland and a woman from the Kombumerri peoples of parts of Queensland, and she will introduce herself properly. But although you're only going to have a short time with Mary this morning, do have a read of her articles. Mary's insights into different kinds of governance systems and to insights into her culture's way of thinking and doing have really enlightened many of us in Australia in the work that we do. So Mary, are you right to have a little chat?
Yes.
Thank you. Over to you, Dom.
Yeah. Do you want to put the map up? Is that possible?
Yeah,
or no?
Yeah, I'll bring that map up now, Dom. Won't be
It's not possible, is it, to make it smaller or something? No, doesn't matter.
When I bring it up, it's pretty big, like the
it's
slides.
pretty big, yes.
Yeah,
okay,
hang on. I'll
yes.
just go back to it. We'll show it for a little bit, and then I can take it down for you. Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
okay. All right. Oh, thank you, and thanks for having us here, making a small presentation. So I'll get sort of right into it, I guess. Very bit different from a longer thing that I usually do, and go straight into not so much the meaning of sacred, but how the people who became Aboriginal people in this country, how they worked out this relationship with the country, and thereby worked out what spirituality and the sacred is to us, all of us, all over the whole country. So it starts off with, I guess, people from another continent, what the scientists say anatomically correct human beings, eventually coming here to this place, which eventually becomes Australia. It's a place called Australia. Well, not actually immediately, but it becomes the people who became Aboriginal came here and made this continent their own. And although they're never quite clear about this in the science, is that when and how humans became not only anatomically correct, but also reflective humans. That is, that they knew that they were human. You know, they realized, they had this realization about becoming human. So we're so old, Aboriginal people, the science says, and the more they keep trying to prove that we came from somewhere else, that, you know, they've more or less proved it, but the more they go on about that, the older we keep getting, apparently, you know. So a whole lot of the scientists say, and even the recent scientists say, that certain different groups, like for example in South Australia, the latest research says, Aboriginal people there have been there from old research material that they had found in their museum down there, because South Australia and Adelaide was always the main place to go for researchers and explorers and so on about the whole country. And that group of people there, Aboriginal people, have been there for between 50 to 80,000 years. The same people, they haven't gone anywhere else. So a whole lot of things can be gained from that, saying mainly that people have see themselves from all over the country as having become human in the place where they are, according to this map here. This map is a whitefellow's map, of course, not an Aboriginal map. It's a language map, essentially, but it tells you a whole lot of things. So when you ask Aboriginal people, you know, about their culture and everything, where they come from, who they are, they will say something like, we didn't come from anywhere else, we came from this place, we became human in this country. And that's actually what they mean. Their realization of becoming human was in this country. So you don't get any dreaming stories about, say, a monkey dreaming or elephant dreaming or anything like that, of course. It's all about the flora and fauna in this country, you know. So what that actually means, also, going further, is that the idea of that humans were a kind of proto-humans and then gradually have become human over vast eons of time. And looking at it from that point of view, it's like as if we're proto-humans becoming human, and our ancestors are actually all the flora and fauna in the place. They are our ancestors, and they talk about this, ancestral spirits, including all the flora and fauna, insects, green ant dreaming, and so on, and bees, native bees, you know, and so on. Whatever you think of, there's probably a dreaming story about it. All there is, actually, and from many parts of the whole country. So the relational in existence, in human existence, is far more important. It has fundamental intrinsic importance, far more so than, say, a kind of religious ideals. So there's no hierarchy in the spiritual world. There's no major numero uno spirit figure. They're all a bit like that map before, or not a map, the human-centered, nature-centered. So so humans are just part of it. So along with multiple dreaming stories, that is, creative narratives of all of these different groups around the country, they all basically give you stories about how everything got to be what it is in those areas, how the flora and fauna got to be there, and then how the humans got to be there, and so on and so on. So the land is several things. It is an inventor, it's a creator, it's a witness, it's all of these things. So the idea is, in this relationalist thinking, is that because we're invented by land, created, we're thrown up by land, we're forever obligated to look after it. So it's like the law of obligations. And it's a kind of, if you like, a kind of contract in a way. We are obliged forever to look after the thing that gave birth to us, essentially. So it's not a survivalist ethos. It is straight survivalism also, of course. You know, there's danger, there's scary bitey things and so on, and great big things that happen like earthquakes and, you know, volcanoes going off and all that sort of thing. But essentially, we are countrymen. We are countrymen to each other, but we're countrymen to the land itself. So the land is seen not as territory. The land is seen as, of course, the raw material. It is land, but it's not territory or property or real estate or anything like that. It is country, and country is a sacred term, meaning you are related intimately with one another. There's an old French version of who we are, you know, the old Cartesian, I think, therefore I am. If Aboriginal people had something like that, they don't, but if they did, it'd be something like, I am located, therefore I am. I am located somewhere, my location, place with a capital P. So relationalist, it's 4 main features there. Place, of course, with a capital P, your clan's country, area, and so on and so on. Your balance, there's balance in a whole lot of things, gender balance, balance with regard to power and authority. We can't go into all of that, but because it takes too long. And autonomy, we're all autonomous beings. Land itself, flora and fauna, they're autonomous beings too. So women definitely are autonomous beings also. And the other one is ethics. There's no actual word for ethics. There is just a general word in hundreds of different languages to do with the law. The law is an all-encompassing idea, concept for correct or proper behavior, which is an ethical view, and so on and so on. So the sacred is, you know, you don't have to see it necessarily as a kind of, what do you say, cherubim and seraphim, you know, and so on and so on, the music of the heavenly spheres and things that go bump in the night and so on and so on. The sacred is in a relationship, actually. And the relationship with the living thing around. In a sense, the science that talks about evolution and so on, in a sense, it's sort of right, actually. When I say that, I mean that the land, not only is it our ancestral spirits, it's our real ancestors. Really, they invented us. So that whole story of, you know, emerging from the slime, you know, out of the water, into the mud or whatever you call it, and then eventually, you know, developing and so on and so on. Really, we may as well say that the science, that particular science is right. But what Aboriginal people did was they sacralized that process. That's all. They didn't put any kind of God figure in there. Nothing like that. And every different area on that map, they've all got their own creative stories, dreaming stories, narratives about how that happened. And they're all different. And yet, they're not completely different. Ones who are neighbours to each other, they might have shared the ancestral being creative narrative of that area, and so on and so on. And all of that gave us a different idea of a social and political ordering of society too. So just very briefly, how it is, because it's relationalist, and there's no hierarchy. So humans are certainly not up at the top of the hierarchy. There's no overpowering, dominating spirit figure that dominates everything else in the spirit, you know, spirituality. So that's why it's not really a religion. The Aboriginal philosophy, it's not really any kind of religion. You won't hear anybody say, "I believe in the dreaming." It's not like a condition of faith. In fact, faith is seen as a kind of weak sort of thing. It's you know, it's strong sometimes, it's weak, you find it, you lose it. Somebody persuades you otherwise about, and so you take up another kind of different belief system, and so on. So it's very unreliable. It's more akin to a psychology of life, if you like. It's certainly not an ideology. And because it isn't religious, that means there's no what do you call it? A fundamental absolutism. That's what I mean. No absolutism in thinking. So the system itself, the political and social system, is flat, just like the spiritual. It's a flat, but there is a soft hierarchy of knowledge. So knowledgeable people who know about sacred matters, sacred business, what is sacred stuff, and so on and so on. And they know all the laws, they know the history, they know the kinship system, they just know a whole lot of things. So knowledgeable people, and that is usually, that is older people who know all these things. So that's where the balance comes in between authority and power. Power and authority are not joined together, as it is in many, many other cultures. It's not conflated, it's separated. So it has to be separated. Otherwise, you'll end up with a hierarchy. And it's sort of bad news having hierarchies, considering what we found out in the last couple of centuries about how hierarchies actually behave around the world. So you can't take power away from people. The power is diffused among the people, and authority is with older, knowledgeable people, sometimes younger, but always knowledgeable people who know how to behave. Another part of that is the idea of autonomous regard. Autonomous regard is literally how you behave towards one another. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter either. I mean, it does matter, but it becomes less than like the way you, what you know is according to, the wisdom or the knowledge comes from how you behave with what you know. So you might know a lot, you might have experienced a great deal, but in the end, what that all rides on is how you actually behave, because that comes back to the relationalist idea. So it's a flat structure, and what it means is that every one of these clan groups, they're all autonomous clan groups. There's in part of this this generalized law of obligation, invasions have never been allowed. In fact, it's a foreign concept, the whole idea of invading somebody else's country. You simply don't do that. You have had this relationless build construction over eons of time, a very long time. So Europeans would probably call it the principle of territorial integrity. That's what you have. However, because they're realists, I always think of Aboriginal notions of existence and so on as ultimately very realistic and down to earth. Not simple, very complex actually, but very realistic. So you may have conflict, because humans being humans, it'd be an amazing thing if they didn't have conflict at some point or another. So you have to have conflict. You have to allow for conflict, but you have all kinds of social and political means how to manage that. I'm sorry, is it nearly finished, love? Oh, sorry, Michelle?
No, Mary, I just thought I would take the map off for a moment so people.
Oh, yes, of course,
so
yes.
Sorry.
It's quite okay, yes.
Didn't mean to interrupt or freak you out. Sorry, Dol.
Yes. No, that's okay.
Continue.
Yes. So what helps with this is to have a logic. We don't have anything like a Western logic, Aristotelian logic, nothing like that. Similar in some ways to Asian, especially Chinese paradoxical logic, accepting ambivalence and ambiguity and contradictions and things like that. Western logic can't stand that. Western logic has to have certainty. They can't deal with uncertainty. But Aboriginal people accept all of that, so it's closer to Chinese logic than it is to the Western. Aboriginal logic is essentially, just to put it in, to reduce it down, is that multiple places, as you saw on that map, multiple places, every place has its own dreaming story, creative narratives. A dreaming story is the law, L-A-W-L-O-R-E, for that country, for that clan group. And the law is the truth for that country. So truth, there's no absolute truth. There are hundreds of truths, hundreds of places, hundreds of dreaming stories, hundreds of laws, hundreds of truths, hundreds and hundreds of them, no absolutism. And the truth is simply the perspective of all of existence from that place. So the equation works out to be that all perspectives are valid and reasonable. And what that is, it suspends judgmentalism. So while you're allowed to have conflict, because you can't help it quite often, it's too impossible to try and have absolute peace, because that's just as hard. So you have conflict, but you have conflict on top of the land in a sense, but not over land. So you can't fight over land and take over somebody else's country. It's again, as I said, it's not it's not allowed, but it's a foreign concept actually. So so that's the kind, and what that does, of course, is allows for a very stable system for a long time. Stable, positive stable, because you can have negative stable, of course, too, like prisons, nuclear power hanging over our heads, like Damocles sword or something. That's a negative kind of stability. But a positive stability is where it's a flourishing society with some conflict. Look after land, which is the great, in a sense, educational blueprint. It tells us essentially how and what ethics are. So our ancestral beings, our ancestral spirit ancestors, tell us how things got to be there. But the continuing looking after land, continuing forever, is actually keeping the ethics in place all the time of what does it mean to have a relationship with land and with each other and so on. But autonomous regard is that kind of, that everybody and everything has autonomous being about them. So you can't treat somebody or something as lower or less important or bad and so on. You look after land, and you may have to exploit some part of it. The brilliant people, what's his name? The recent books. Bruce Pascoe and the other guy, The Greatest Estate on Earth,
Bill Gamage.
Bill Gamage, yeah.
Yeah.
They've got all the detail of how Aboriginal people technically looked after the place, what they did, how they did it, everything about that. So that went on for a very, very well, for as long as anything. I'm not quite sure if I got everything. I was just going to say something about that spirit, what the sacred could be and is, and it is different for all people. Like, and I choose the thing of what for me it's music. I love music, all kinds of music. Of course, our own old Aboriginal traditional music and the stories. It's always connected up with land. Always, it's the bottom line or background, and it's infused throughout the whole society. But also, it's things like the chants or the choir singing of Hildegard of Bingen. Russian Orthodox Church singing, if you've ever heard it, it's wonderful. And I would also say John Coltrane. I don't know if people have heard of John Coltrane, a great American jazz musician. And for me personally, and for many people apparently, it is like sacred music, So sacred has a lot of meaning in a whole range of things for a lot of people. And that's just my personal choices, of course. But yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Mary. What we might do is, if anyone has a question for Mary Graham, you can either write it in the chat, or perhaps if you know how to put your hand up right now, or if in doubt, just wave like this. But Mary, before we either go to other questions or hand over to Mary Tinney, when you talk about sacralising the living world or the Aboriginal view of what is sacred, what role do you think the sacred has had in ensuring the law? Do you think it's because people saw something as sacred that they protected it, or was it a mix of simply understanding how important it was and knowing it was sacred?
Well, I always think of, and what I've been told, I've always thought of it as being this idea of this autonomous regard, and it's I'm still trying to work more on that from what I gather from other Aboriginal people, my family, relatives, friends, and so on, and people around the country, is that, for example, it's like you look and you see the land. We all do, every human being does. We may even talk to it, but the real point is that it looks back at us. It actually, because you can look at it like a science way or whatever, as energy, just pure energy or something like that. But when we look at it, when we look at it, it is looking and talking back to us. You read books like The Story of Feeling, The Story of Feeling by Uncle Bill Neegee. He's died now, but it's a wonderful little book, tiny little paperback. It's him talking, that's all. And he talks about what the land actually means to him. And talking to this tree, the tree, and the sap in the tree is like the blood in our veins, and so on and so on. There's different ways of looking too. You can see it in language. In the English word behold, there's the word behold. In Aboriginal languages, there are sacred words like thee, thine, thou, things like that. So there's words like this, like behold. In French, it's regarder. That's why I like the word autonomous regard. You own yourself because you yourself have, in a sense, your own personal sovereignty or personhood, if you like. And whoever you're talking to or whatever, that is autonomous too. So you have to behave in this regard way. And the word regard for me is like respect plus. It's not just respect, it's deep, deep respect. So I like the word, and the French term of it, regardez-vous, meaning behold, behold. So you're sacralising in language and talk and behaviour and so on and so on. There's probably the different in many different languages all over the world. The word for behold, so you actually have a language. Another way of having this language is in Aboriginal terms, Aboriginal languages. There is that everything has to be related in some way. I'll give this, I won't go into it, but there's this example of a photo of a very basic landscape photo, and being described in Aboriginal terms, not so important, not concentrating on the nouns, because the language doesn't like nouns that stand alone. So the boat on the beach, the boat on the beach by the water, or something like that it is. In the Aboriginal languages, in English you'd say it exactly like that. In an Aboriginal language you'd say beach, boat, beach, water, ness, N-E-S-S. The character of that whole scene, it's all joined together. It's all related. So everything you absolutely look at, you're related to it. You yourself as a viewer, you're not a standalone outside observer. You are an observer, but in the observed world, and you're viewing, but you're in it too. You're viewing yourself in it, and so on. So all of that is related to what the sacred is, actually. Sorry.
Wonderful, Mary. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been trying to read through the chats. There's a couple of comments which I won't read, but there's one question. It's about, you like this question, I think. If I can just go back. Sorry, guys.
Oh yeah. Say anything challenging, or comment, or be critical, or whatever.
One person, I think it's Gina, has said, is it similar to the Taoist connection to the natural order?
It's related. It's related. I sometimes say, from what I gather about, say, for example, that, and also Buddhism, it's like a psychology of life. I've been told that, but I also have understood that. So this is like a psychology of life, and of course it's so old. It's culture, It's culture. It's.
Thank you, Mary. Another question from Henry. You said there are a lot of narratives or perspectives about, excuse me, about man's relationship, I suppose that's human relation to country. And yet from what you were saying, it seems that there is commonality of view about some core ethical and political issues, principles. Yes. How do you explain this uniformity across all peoples? Forgive me if I misunderstood or mischaracterised your views. I'm new to Australian.
Yes.
To Australia. Thank you, Henry.
Yes.
Good question.
Yes, good question. There are things that, and who knows how it actually worked out, the actual development of all of these different places, except the fact that they had always been in those places, as it's been scientifically proved. But Aboriginal people talk, and their stories are like that too, why they're there. There had been changes. There had been rivers change their course, the sea recedes, so they have to literally shift because their land is just simply no longer there, present. They have to somehow work out things with their neighbours and so on and so on. But for all kinds of reasons, they take the idea of conflict, or I like the word discontents. You have to weigh up and put on the same kind of level that there are always, with humans, there's always discontents, but continuities, life itself, or being, if you want to get philosophical about it, being with a capital B, it just goes on, and occasionally there are discontents, and it's got to be a kind of all in balance. So, for example, say conflict. If it happened, as I understand it, looking at other cultures and history and so on, when there are constant conflicts or big conflicts or something like that, sooner or later, an Alexander the Great character, or the emperor who created China, they all go for something like unification. So unification is not seen in a great golden aura in this country. The principle of territorial and country, just read country for territorial, the principle of territorial integrity, that's what stands out. That's the correct thing to do. So you don't go for autonomy. You don't go for unification, I should say. Unification is not seen as a great solution to it all. We're having this fight. Look, we've got a traditional fight that they're our traditional enemies. Why don't we just sort of sort out this thing and then just all come together? Absolutely not. Autonomous regard has to rule in a way. You know, yes, you are you, and we are. I am I. You know, they are their own boss. We're our own boss, and so on and so on and so on. We'll work it out, and that's the funny thing about flat structures. In a hierarchy, it's easier to have order, control and order, because the ones up above just simply tell the ones below, on pain of death or punishment of some sort, you will do what we say, and so on down the class or caste system, and so on and so on. So you have fairly, wars fairly regularly, whereas in a flat structure with a hierarchy of knowledgeable people, you have to literally work hard at relations. You have to put a huge amount of effort, and what that does, it sounds like a lot of very hard work, and it is, but the best thing about it is that you become better at it with time and age and so on and so on. You work out different ways of doing this. So if anything, by their sheer age, Aboriginal people, it could be said that they even invented the thing of diplomacy, you know, of how to get on, even given arguments and so on and so on. So it's what sounds like a contradiction isn't really. Yeah. I hope that's enough.
No, that's wonderful, Mary. And Henry says, thank you. Look, we have a number of other questions in there, but I'm aware of time. And I have to give a little plug for anyone who would like to hear more from Mary Graham. This Saturday, we have another one of our Future Dreaming workshops, which is co-hosted by Mary Graham, Ross Williams, myself, and Lib Macon as part of Future Dreaming. I will put a link in there to the end of this. And today's session will be recorded. And for anyone who's been able to finally join, I have been in discussion with folks in the AELA team. We should have been able to host up to 500 people on this call. We paid for an extended account months ago. We do not know what's gone wrong. So our apologies to anyone who's been stuffed around. It's not anything we would have liked to have happened. But Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We've got a ton of great questions, but we will have many, many other opportunities to talk with Mary over the coming 12 months. So please stay in touch. And I'll send you all some email, some website addresses. Mary may have to duck off at about 10 past. I'm glad if we can stop now with questions, then our other Mary Tinney, can now join us. And I know Mary Graham's keen to hear Mary Tinney.
Yes.
So, but I've discovered that this is the way On. Thank you so much, Mary Graham. This is a gentle clapping for your talk. Thank you.
Oh, right, yes. Thank you.
I'll put you on mute, Mary, and whenever
Yes,
you need
okay.
to leave us, you just jump off. And
Okay.
thank you so much for being part of our discussion today.
Okay, love. Thank you.
So
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. On that note, Mary Tinney, would you like to join us?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Do you want anything more? Ready to go?
Yeah, I think if you would like to introduce your background, because it's so diverse, I might pick on the wrong bits and pieces. So.
Oh, well, I think you'll pick it up. There's some reference to it in what I say, so I think we'll go with that, eh?
Okay.
Now we'll just do some of this technical stuff.
It's all good. Yep.
Wait a minute, where's this computer audio thing?
You should be fine. You're talking. We can hear you. We can
Yeah,
see.
computer sound. All right. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's get to the beginning.
You may just want to put your slides on.
Yeah, getting there.
Yeah.
I don't want that. Okay, ready to roll?
Okay. We can't see you anymore. Did you know that?
Well, you should be able to if you...
No, you've turned your video off.
Have I?
Yeah. You can just see your name.
Can you turn it back on?
I can try. Ask to start video. Yeah, I didn't turn it off. There you are.
Hello.
All good. Okay, Mary, thank you.
Okay, well, I come to this presentation as a white Australian with Celtic origins who lives in the northern suburbs of Brisbane with Cabbage Tree Creek as a neighbour. And I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of this place, the Turrbal people, and invite you to acknowledge the traditional owners in your place. This ancient land was here in the silences and its sounds of life, long before history was written, held carefully in its dreaming. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land and water of our various areas. We pay our respects to them and honour their links with all creation. May we walk gently on this land. So my background is in secondary education, where I specialised in religious education. And after more than a decade in governance of a religious congregation of women, the Sisters of Mercy, I set up a community centre called Earthlink, whose vision is of a world where there's respect, reverence, and care for the whole earth community. The call to reverence comes from a strong and experienced sense of the earth community as sacred. The whole earth community. I believe that this is at the heart of the matter as you revision your practice, and I invite you to move even further into an encounter with earth as sacred. So I hope in some ways this will appeal to your heart. It's not just descriptive, but it's an invitation to enter even further into an encounter with earth as sacred. Sacred is, well, let's begin by understanding how I understand sacred. And I'm heavily indebted to the First Nations peoples of this land. So there's an Aboriginal sense of sacred presence in the whole of reality. It's impossible for European Australians to enter into the deeply Aboriginal sense of land as spiritual, but it is salutary for us to learn from it. The lived experience of the whole earth community as sacred is expressed poetically in the poem by Dennis Kevins, Ah, White Man, Have You Any Sacred Sites? In one of the verses he says, sacred means that. Sacred, that's a place where the spirits rise, with the rainbow wings of sunset on the edge of paradise. Sacred, that's my father, that's my daughter, that's my son. Sacred, where the dreaming whispers hope for everyone. In the rest of the poem, he says with great frustration that there's minimal evidence of the sense of sacredness in the pollution of rivers, and the extraction of bauxite, and in the empty cathedrals. He calls us beyond our present practices and spirituality. Now, someone who has shared a special quality of Aboriginal people, which she refers to as the Diri, is Miriam Rose Ungamir Bowman from the Daly River in the Northern Territory. She speaks about this special quality of her people, which is both an experience of the sacred inner dimension of nature and the practice that gives rise to it. And I quote initially, "I believe the Diri is most important. It is our most unique gift. It is perhaps the greatest gift we can give to our fellow Australians. In our language, this quality is called the Diri. It is inner, deep listening and quiet, still awareness. The Diri recognises the deep spring that is inside us. We call on it and it calls to us. This is the gift that Australia is thirsting for. And wherever I say Australia, I just hope you can translate that into your own country. It is something like what you call contemplation. When I experienced a Diri, I am made whole again. I can sit on the riverbank or walk through the trees. Even if someone close to me has passed away, I can find my peace in this silent awareness. There is no need of words. A big part of the Diri is its listening quality and quiet, still awareness." And we're going to take about 3 minutes to hear Miriam Rose introduce us to this notion.
Mary, we can hear it, but we can't see it. Have you got it on another screen?
No, share screen sharing. That's what happened the other day. Anyway, listening will do. It's not as good, but
to know me is to breathe with me. To breathe with me is to listen deeply. To listen deeply is to connect. It's the sound of deep calling to deep. Dadidi, the deep inner spring inside us. We call on it, and it calls on us. We are river people. We cannot hurry the river. We need to move with the current and understand its ways. We wait for the rain to fill our rivers and water our thirsty earth. We watch our bush foods and wait for them to open before we gather them. We wait for our young people as they grow. The time for rebirth is now. If our culture is alive and strong and respected, it will grow. It will not die, and our spirit will not die. I believe that the spirit of Dadidi that we have to offer will blossom and grow, not just within ourselves, but in our whole nation.
At that stage, it's followed by the acknowledgement. My apologies for that, but I don't know what to do about it. If you Google Dadiri the movie, you will should be able to follow that up yourself. But I still think what she had to say was what I wanted you to hear anyway. We Australians are privileged to share country with a deeply spiritual people. For them, the parts and the whole are intertwined and have always been so. Their sense of spirit is embedded in place. Their spirit creates from within earth and is always intimately present. Indigenous awareness of the sacred inner dimension of nature is something that we Westerners need to take to heart as we shape governance and law for our times. So let's talk about sacred as encounter. It's not just a descriptor like saying something is red, blue, green or gold. It's about a two-way encounter. Encounters with the whole earth community as sacred are mystical experiences which are often unmediated. Such encounters can be described as the experience of a reality within or beneath the immediate material reality, and the experience of a oneness that includes and encloses everyone and everything. There's a sense of something more. At times, while these encounters are often unplanned, unscheduled, at other times they are prepared for by immersion in place and space, and or by the cultivation of rituals and practices. Such experiences are often accompanied by emotions of awe and wonder. And so I'm going to explore some of those entry points. And I begin with place and space. Following on from the Indigenous gift of Dadiri explored above is their strong Indigenous sense of place as the medium for transformative mystical encounters. And I'm moved by the words of Elsie Bancroft, who comes from the far mid-north coast of New South Wales. And as you skim through that, I just want to highlight, and this is just something that's become very, very meaningful for me, wherever I am in Australia or wherever, sense of place is there. And this next bit, I think, is inclusive too. The love of being Aussie is not the colour of your face, it's the feeling deep within that gives you sense of place. That feeling deep within is something that's sought through immersion in the landscape. And I noticed one of the comments or one of the comments in the chat room. I think that's where we start, just by being there, by allowing ourselves to be immersed in the landscape and by acknowledging that it impacts on us and we impact on it. Or as somebody else in the chat room said, I observe, but I am being observed. Place and space are important. They're variables in the encounter. It's very different from the disconnection or the autism, to use a phrase of Thomas Berry, which has marked the separation of people from nature during preceding centuries. This separation is seen to be the source of the abuse that humans are wreaking on planet Earth and the cosmos. It needs to be addressed if an ethic based on kinship is to take us into a different future. Let's talk a little tiny bit about awe and wonder, which are emotions which are often associated with this whole sense of encounter with the sacred. And again, they're not planned for, they're not scheduled, they just usually happen. And an encounter with sacred earth is often accompanied by feeling awe and wonder, emotions which often but not exclusively have a religious significance. These emotions have the potential to open us out to surprise and to the unpredictable. Wonder is about receptivity and curiosity about what is possible. It disconnects us for a time from the pressures of our capitalist and consumer society and takes us into another realm. Robert Fuller explains. First, wonder is an emotion linked with approach and affiliation rather than avoidance. Wonder motivates attention, motivates a quest for increasing connection and belongingness with putative sources of unexpected displays of life, beauty or truth. Wonder is thus somewhat rare among the emotions in its functional capacity to motivate persons to venture outward into increased rapport with the environment. You've all had moments of wonder. Second, wonder awakens our mental capacity for abstract higher order thought. Indeed, wonder seems to direct our cognitive activities to identify causality, agency and purpose in ways that are not directly connected with our biological survival. So it opens us out to alternatives. Fuller sees a natural fit between wonder and spirituality and religion, but not everybody does. He quotes Richard Dawkins, whose sense of awe and wonder in the experience of scientific exploration of the natural world is very strong, and whose protest about linking awe and wonder with religion is even stronger. There are many ways of experiencing sacred earth. I schematise them along a continuum at one end of the spectrum, and you'll probably find yourself somewhere in this spectrum. I start with the Gaians. Their approach is similar to that of James Lovelock, whose biological work indicates that Earth has the properties of a living organism. And his colleague Stephen Harding, whose zoological work takes him to a sense of animate Earth. It's the basis of their encounter with it. Further along the spectrum are those who encounter or name Earth as sacred. We often have the experience and the encounter. The point I'm trying to make is that we name it in different ways. That people who encounter Earth as sacred have a profound sense of encountering mystery, however they might name it. For non-theists, such as biologist Ursula Goodenough and the anthropologist Terence Deacon, their approach has all the hallmarks of a religious experience, inspiring awe and wonder and grounding their ethical behaviour. It's an example of animism. Further along the spectrum are pantheists who see Earth as identical with the sacred, whether this be God or the gods or goddesses. My fourth category is what Larry Rasmussen would call an earth-honouring faith. It is panentheistic, in that God is in nature, but not contained by it. And it's a position being developed in contemporary Christian theology. I'll just come back to that in a minute. The spectrum would not be complete without including a more otherworldly approach, which is predominantly earth-deprecating, and which has contributed significantly to the devastation of the earth community, which we are seeking to address. Now, to go back and take an example of earth-honouring faith. In the Catholic tradition, Pope Francis in Laudato Si has underlined some of the developments emerging in contemporary Christian theology. In a major shift, he is asserting that Earth is valuable in itself and not just because of its usefulness to humans. And this harkens back to Michelle's very first presentation about anthropocentrism versus what I call an anthropocosmic view. In Laudato Si, the Pope says multiple times that everything is connected. For him, this is not just theoretical, but the basis of our identity and kinship. He says in paragraph 89 of Laudato Si, God has joined us so closely to the world around us that we can feel the desertification of the soil almost as a physical ailment. and the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement. He goes further to build a theology based on these foundations. He includes earth in our understanding of what is sacred. In paragraph 85 of Laudato Si, we can say that alongside revelation properly so called, contained in sacred scripture, there is a divine manifestation in the blaze of the sun and the fall of the night. Paying attention to this manifestation, we learn to see ourselves in relation to all other creatures. I express myself in expressing the world. In my effort to decipher the sacredness of the world, I explore my own. It's a whole new sense of openness around about this. A lot of the Vatican documents up until this have only ever quoted from themselves. And for this even to be quoting from Paul Ricoeur is shows a helpful new openness of attitude. Now let's move to the praxis that follows from this. Ethical behaviour follows from the experience of earth as sacred. For Larry Rasmussen and for Earthlink, the finite contains the infinite, and earth-honouring faith becomes a basis for respect, reverence and care. Rasmussen extends the scope of moral responsibility beyond social justice to eco-justice, valuing even the elements of earth, wind, fire and water. This is the preferred position articulated in the Oslo Manifesto for Ecological Law and Governance. Its authors acknowledge the failing of environmental law in addressing environmental degradation. They critique its underlying principles, and I would absolutely resonate with these. They name them as Cartesian dualism, philosophical individualism, and ethical utilitarianism. So that's out of the manifesto, paragraph 3. They do not advocate for its reform, but rather for its replacement by ecological law based on ecocentrism, holism, and intergenerational and interspecies justice. In Article 6, they contrast the two approaches. They contrast in environmental law, they see human activities and aspirations determining whether or not the integrity of ecological systems should be protected. That's even under environmental law, by the way, which would be a big improvement on many systems, whether they be economic or political or religious for that matter. Whereas in the declaration, they propose ecological law as the reform, where the need to protect the integrity of ecological systems determines human activities and aspirations. As you will see, there's a reversal of priorities. We can eventually move to practices in law and governance that are built upon recognition of the interdependency of all segments of the earth community. It's beyond binary thinking, which is still there in that declaration actually, to a recognition of the interdependency of all segments of the earth community and the promotion of mutually enhancing earth-human relations as promoted by Thomas Berry. I would argue that such changes will not come about without the type of encounter that I have been speaking about. We cannot exercise human responsibility for nature unless we have developed a relationship with earth as sacred, however we articulate that experience. The first step for every individual is to fall in love with earth and acknowledge our mutual interdependence and connectivity as the basis of our worldview and of all our actions. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mary.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Mary.
You're right, back in business.
That was really wonderful. Thanks for connecting your thoughts and your work also into the Oslo Manifesto by ELGA. So that's terrific. We're coming up to 10:20, so we definitely have a few minutes, maybe 5 or 6 minutes or so, for questions for Mary Tinney. There's been a number of comments in the chat box. I don't think we really have time for me to read all the comments, but please do have a read if you're interested in what other participants are offering or suggesting. In a slightly shorter format, we could have had all of our questions answered, but today was really about listening to our speakers, I think. Are there any questions from anyone? People are putting lots of thank yous in there, Mary.
Okay, I'll just start looking at it a bit now.
That's a nice thing. There's a long comment there. A couple of questions about how to access Indigenous readings. Oh, we've got a message here. Oh, we've got lots of thank yous. Well, I'll ask you a question, Mary. Do you feel that the Laudato Si, for example, has helped to shift some attention from one of the main religious systems in the world towards the earth? I'd be very curious to know, many years later, what kind of impact, if any, it has had, because there was a lot of interest at the time.
Yes, and fortunately that interest was, it extended well beyond the Catholic Church. In fact, one of my memorable experiences was an event organised by the United Nations group, one of their annual peace lecture, given by Bob Brown in St John's Cathedral in Brisbane, with him holding up a copy of Laudato Si. Now, their links and connections and I mean, because it was Bob Brown, the people in St John's Cathedral weren't in the typical congregation. But anyway, I'm pleased to say that, well, look, institutions are pretty slow to move. So all of that, we've got to be realistic. I always say it depends on your model of change. Mine is about planting something beside the brick walls and putting my attention into nurturing the plant. And ultimately the plant gets stronger and it finds its way into the cracks and the cracks get bigger. So, I'm personally not into tackling brick walls, but it's Laudato Si +5. And I'm very relieved to know that this item hasn't fallen off the agenda, the church agenda, at the Vatican level anyway. And they're in fact launching a program of implementation 5 years later. And I think, they're quite intentional about it. And I think there are some local initiatives, of course. Locally, there's a whole lot of promotion of Laudato Si, but it's absolutely patchy, as always.
Thank you, Mary. There's a question for Mary Graham, but Mary Graham has had to leave the call. As we explained, she had to jump onto another meeting. But there is a question, actually, I think 2 people have asked if you could bring up the slide again that compares environmental law with ecological law. Okay.
Also, I'll refer you to paragraph 6 of your Oslo manifesto, because that's where it came from. And
well, would you perhaps, I was actually going to wrap up. I was going to wrap up by showing the Oslo manifesto on the website. So
there you are. This should bring it up. It mightn't be quite here. Let's see if we can get it. No, sorry, mistake.
No, that's okay. You just scroll back up. That'll do. People can read that. So a couple of folks asked to see that slide again. Did you have a particular question about that?
Who, me or them?
Sorry, I'm talking to our audience, our lovely colleagues. Did anyone have a particular question about this, or did you just want to have a quick read?
Human activities and aspirations determining integrity of systems versus protecting integrity, determining human activities and aspirations. And I actually want to move you a bit further than either of those, because that's still binary thinking. It's a classic of what happens when the oppressed can rise to the top of the scheme and rise to the top of the priorities. And we've got to go through that first. But I think there's a step beyond that where we recognise the interdependence and the connectivity, and we get a more mutual relationship between the two, where we know that both are so interconnected that they both have to be attended to together. But that comes out of a sense of your own identity and your own kinship.
Hey Mary, there's a great question from Tamsin. She's saying, I'm interested in the conflict, she calls it the conflict between the idea of God with all the attendant hierarchy issues versus Mary Graham's approach, and I think this person's referring to the soft hierarchies and I guess the non-religious element of Aboriginal culture. How does the idea of a single all-seeing God work with an ecological worldview?
Well, I can only say that historically I've had to make a journey that takes me a long way from that, you know, all-seeing, omnipotent, what were the three words? Omnipotent, omniscient and something, omnipresent. I'll stick with omnipresent. But there's been some pretty serious challenging of omnipotent and all powerful and all knowing. There've been some serious challenges of all of that, and I think like we as Christians do balance the tension of a sense of a God that is beyond but also very present. And I mean, that's really why I've tried to engage with the contemporary theology in a much more serious fashion, where the sense of you know, the God present is far more vibrant and far more alive. So I think what's happened for me, as you know, as a theist, as a Christian Catholic theist, but who's really only now interested in the contemporary approaches, is that God is omnipresent, but who doesn't interfere, doesn't change, but is omnipresent.
And so your personal journey has taken you away from some of your original ideas on...
A long way away.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we're starting to wrap up with time. A follow-up question to that question is, thank you, Mary, is God more like the concept of nature, perhaps? Ooh.
Well, they're so participative, mutually interdependent, just the same way as we're mutually interdependent. I think, yeah, and I think in some ways, if it's a relational God, and that resonates very strongly with what Mary Graham was saying, if you are in relationship, if one party changes, the other party changes. So you've even got a God who is, you know, in relationship. We've always had a God who's in relationship, but it was from a very safe distance. This is a far closer God. And I mean, I do believe that there's a sense in which God changes because God's in relationship. And one thing that definitely changes is our understanding of God. But I do believe God changes as a result of the relationships.
Wonderful. Well, it's 10:28 Australian Brisbane time, and so we're going to wrap up now. But I really want to make sure that we give an online thank you to Mary Tinney for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, Mary. I'm applauding.
Thanks for the opportunity, Michelle.
No worries.
Michelle, can I have a copy of the comments, the chat later?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to do a bit of a wrap up, I'm actually going to share screen because I'd like to do some housekeeping and follow-ups in terms of plugging the organisations that are running and working together on some of these amazing issues. I am just going to share screen. Am I sharing screen?
Yes.
God,
Yes.
it's been one of those days. So I just wanted to show folks who are not familiar with the Ecological Law and Governance Association, this is the website and this is the web link. And it's an excellent developing space for people, even if you're not a lawyer. The work of governance theory and governance ideas is really about the rules that underpin modern society, and everyone should be interested in that. And certainly what we're seeing with the ecological crisis and the social justice crisis of our 21st century, now more than ever, trying to find the new coding for our society is really important. So please do visit the ELGA website, sign up to the mailing list, and have a little peek at the Oslo Manifesto. It's a really important read and certainly sums up a lot of what many, many great lawyers, thinkers and others are working on right now, is how do we shift the system. Just another quick plug for my organisation, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. We are multidisciplinary. We auspiced the creation of the New Economy Network Australia. We run an Earth Ethics program, an Earth Arts program, as well as law, governance and living within our ecological limits. We are also proud auspicers of Future Dreaming Australia. This is a wonderful new entity that was created by myself, Mary Graham, another colleague, Ross Williams, and another colleague, Lib. And if you go to that website, futuredreaming.org.au, you'll see our current webinar series where Mary Graham gives about an hour worth of her wonderful wisdom, and Ross Williams and I 30 or 40 minutes each. The next one is this Saturday, so do visit that website if you'd like to engage with Future Dreaming. We do charge for those ones because we're raising money, particularly to support Ross Williams' mentoring of young Indigenous kids and people. We've got an amazing body of work that we're working on over the coming many, many years, we hope. And other than that, I guess I just really want, for anyone listening to this recording, really want to apologize again. We did have a paid account with Zoom that should have hosted up to 500 people. For some reason, today's went back to the only letting 100 on. So anyone who's listening to this, profound apologies. There's nothing worse in the whole world than wanting to come and join a conversation and be blocked out. But I will make sure that we are emailing all our participants tomorrow with the link, the PowerPoint presentations, and clarification around some of the reading suggestions that were made today. So thank you, everybody. We'll sign off now. It's 10:32, and I'm really, really pleased that you could join us. Thanks so much for staying on a call like this, and we'll see you again. Thank you, Mary. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Michelle.
See everyone.